Hello. In this presentation, I will explain the process I used when completing Assignment 3 of Information 281 Metadata, the Metadata Mini-Project 2. For this assignment, I decided to create records for various PDF ebooks that I have accumulated on my computer over the years, as if they were being cataloged for a digital library. I used MODS, the Metadata Object Description Schema. MODS is an XML-based schema which is more complex than Dublin Core but simpler than MARC, and which is particularly useful for identifying digital resources. Most of the following records contain the title info, name, type of resource, origin info, language, physical description, abstract, table of contents, subject, related item, identifier, location, and record info top-level elements if they are applicable and the relevant information is available. I chose not to use genre, target audience, note, classification, access condition, part, or extension tags for this assignment, as they did not seem as useful or appropriate as the others in this case. I have omitted it from the records shown in this presentation for visibility, but this schema declaration would typically be used for these kinds of records. This is the first record I composed, and therefore the one in which I first encountered some questions and issues that would guide how I made the rest. It describes a book about figure drawing. It begins with a title info element, which in this case contains both a title and subtitle. Next is the name element. Like most of the works referenced in this assignment, the creator is an individual, and thus a personal name is used. The family and given names each have their own name part subelement, with corresponding family and given attributes. For the type of resource, I specified digital, and did the same for all other records. Under the origin info element, I listed the publisher, copyright, date, and edition, as it is applicable to the item. Next is the language element. Note that the actual language values are in the language term subelement. I indicated using attributes that I am using a coded rather than textual expression of the language, and that the code I am using is derived from the International Organization for Standardization 6392B nomenclature. In the following physical description element, I specify that this is an electronic resource. A brief description of the work is given in the abstract element. In the table of contents element, an outline of the different sections of the work is shown. For the subject element, I described the topic subelement as being derived from the Library of Congress Subject Heading Authority and gave the URI of the topic that is named in the tag, in this case, figure drawing technique. In the identifier element, I specified that the identifier is an ISBN using an attribute. For location, I placed an imagined URL in a URL subelement. Finally, I created a record info element with source and creation date subelements, in which I stated that the source was hypothetical library and that the creation date, in ISO 8601 format, is the due date for this assignment. In practice, this kind of administrative metadata can help with interpretation and determining provenance of metadata records. Next, I described a chapter from the Encyclopedia of Library and Information Science. In many ways, this record is similar to the previous one. However, there are some minor differences. An abstract is provided in the text itself, so I used it for the abstract element. For the identifier, a DOI is used instead of an ISBN. The chapter is also part of a larger work, which I indicated using the related item element. This record is about a book of analyses and interpretations of a particular work of medieval literature. It is similar to the previous records in most ways. However, it has two topics: Arthurian romances, history and criticism, and Grail legends, history and criticism. Each of these sub-elements is listed in its own subject top-level element. Next is a record for the book Man's Search for Meaning, which is the first in this assignment that has two names listed, each in a separate name tag. The first is the author. The second is the translator, and in addition to the family and given name sub-elements, a third sub-element identifies the translator role. Like in the prior record, there are two topics. For the next record, about a translation of part of a medieval poem, only one name part element is used for the first name element, as the poet is generally known only as Wace. The translator is listed in the same manner as in the previous record. I was somewhat uncertain about what to list as the topic. Arthurian romances seemed appropriate, but I thought that might be used for books about Arthurian romances, rather than actual examples of that category. However, because I knew from a previous record that subject headings like Arthurian romances, history, and criticism are used for the former category, I decided to use Arthurian romances. No identifier, such as a DOI or ISBN, was given for this work. In this record, I describe a comic book containing advice about how to live frugally. It clearly follows the conventions described previously. Here, I describe the California Driver Handbook. This is the first item to have a corporate rather than individual author, as shown in the attribute for the name element. The handbook does not contain an identifier such as a DOI or ISBN. Next is a record for a textbook about American history. It is the first of 2 volumes in a set, and I was unsure of how to indicate this. I ultimately included Volume 1 in the subtitle. This record is for an art book for the video game Disco Elysium. It also does not have an identifier. Finally, I created a record for a book that explains physics concepts using fictional superheroes. By this point, I was confident in my understanding of the metadata practice I had been using. These are the resources I consulted when completing this assignment. Thank you for watching.